The only thing certain in this world of ours is that nothing's certain. That's the fact. You never know what people are truly behind the tailored suits, tucked-in shirts, finely combed hair, and good etiquette. If you're still unsure, then today's story will definitely change your mind. Welcome back to Twisted Minds. My name is James, and this is the case of Robert Allen Durst, a convicted murderer and suspected serial killer who has recently been incarcerated.
That opening hits hard, doesn't it? Robert Durst, born into wealth, seemed to have it all, yet something dark was brewing beneath the surface. His story makes you wonder, how does someone with every opportunity spiral into such chaos? The privilege. The paint, it's a stark reminder that money can't buy stability. As we dive into his childhood, I can't help but feel a chill thinking about what shaped him. What do you think pushes someone to the edge like this?
The eldest of 4 children, Robert Durst was born on April 12, 1943, into a Jewish family in Scarsdale, New York. The family consisted of Seymour Durst, his father, who was already a successful real estate businessman, and his mother, Bernice Durst. Robert's grandfather, Joseph Durst, had emigrated to the United States from Austria-Hungary to establish the Durst Organization, of which Seymour Durst and his own, Robert Durst, were heirs. Clearly, Robert was born into the Jewish upper class of New York, and as a result, had the best of the best available to him at all times. The best toys, clothing, and food that a child could have, and the best education a parent could wish for. He was a modest performer in school, and others around him expected him to grow up to be a successful professional man, or at the very least, a successful manager of the Durst Organization. However, none of that turned out to be the case. Despite the fact that everything looks like it's already set up for Robert to have a wonderful life, the truth is his childhood was far less than ideal. Robert Durst had 3 siblings, 2 brothers and 1 sister. With his brother Douglas, he would spend an unhealthy amount of time fighting and arguing, to the point where it would often result in serious confrontations with blood being shed. The exact causes behind the fighting are hard to come by, but the 2 brothers were eventually evaluated by a psychiatrist who noted a presence of personality decomposition and possibly even schizophrenia. However, one event occurred during his childhood that many believe to be his psychological breaking point in a sense: the death of his mother, Bernice Durst, by falling from the roof of their home. Robert himself had said that moments before her death, his father, Seymour, walked him to a window from which he could see his mother standing on the roof. Many believe this to mean that Robert is insinuating that Seymour forced Bernice to commit suicide. But this is contradicted by Douglas Durst, who says that Robert had never witnessed their mother's death. Whatever happened, we can all agree that life in the Durst household was rather tough despite the wealth and opportunities. Tough to the point where Bernice Durst felt the need to kill herself. Nothing much came out of the police's inquest into Bernice's death, probably as a result of the influence and power Seymour held being at the helm of the Durst Organization. Kathleen McCormack was a dental hygienist who was in her 4th and final year at Albert Einstein College of Medicine and was due to receive her degree soon after. She and Robert met in 1971, right after she graduated from high school, and the two had begun dating soon afterward. The courtship quickly led to marriage, and they settled in Vermont at first as Robert founded and managed his health food store there. The connection between Kathy and Robert was immediate and reciprocal on that beautiful Sunday afternoon in the fall. That was the start of a storybook relationship, according to Kathy's brother, Jim McCormack. They had then moved to Manhattan after Seymour Durst, Robert's father, had requested Robert to move back to help run the Durst Organization. However, by that time, Robert's broken mind had caught up with the marriage, and the marriage had devolved into regular fits of shouting, shoving, pushing, and swearing. Then, suddenly, McCormack went missing. Kathleen was last seen by somebody other than Durst on January 31st, 1982, at a dinner party held by her friend Gilbert Najami in Newtown, Connecticut. McCormack showed up to the dinner agitated and was seen wearing red sweatpants, which Najami thought weird because she had previously dressed in much better gear. Following a phone call from her husband, McCormack departed for her marital residence in South Salem, New York that same night. Robert would later say that he placed his wife on a commuter train to New York City at Katna Station, had a drink with a neighbor, and later that evening spoke to his wife on the phone in their Manhattan apartment. He then claimed that all he did was go home and sleep. Well, not really. In fact, the couple had a bitter argument that evening, and then the story gets more interesting. McCormack and Najami were meant to meet at the Lion's Gate in Manhattan after McCormack had left Najami's residence. When she didn't show up, Najami got anxious and phoned the cops multiple times over the course of several days. Durst also filed a missing persons report later that week. A doorman and the building supervisor at the couple's Riverside Drive apartment claimed to have seen McCormack there on February the 1st, the day after she was last positively seen. But the doorman added that he only saw her from behind and from half a block distance and couldn't be sure if it was her. 3 weeks before her disappearance, McCormack had been treated for facial bruising at a Bronx hospital, which was the work of Robert. She informed a friend that Durst had beaten her, but she did not pursue charges. After that, McCormack requested a $250,000 divorce settlement from Robert, to which Robert, on the other hand, reacted by revoking his wife's credit card, taking her name off a joint bank account, and refusing to pay her medical school tuition. And another piece of detail that made this case tricky is that Robert had been seeing another woman for 3 years, Prudence Farrow, and was living in a different apartment when McCormack vanished. When one of McCormack's friends and her sister learned of her disappearance, they broke into her cottage in the hopes of finding her. Instead, they discovered the cottage had been plundered. McCormack's mail had been left unread, and her possessions had been thrown away.
Kathleen's story breaks my heart. She was so close to her degree, full of promise, but trapped in a marriage that turned violent. The red sweatpants, the plundered cottages, haunting how quickly she vanished. Durst's excuses feel so calculated, don't they? It's infuriating to think how easily he slipped through the cracks. This case screams injustice, and it makes me wonder how many others like Kathleen never got answers. What would you do if someone you loved just disappeared?
Susan Berman had been a longtime friend of Durst since they met at UCLA. She had helped him establish a public alibi following McCormack's disappearance, and she was also the daughter of David Berman, a renowned mobster who managed the Flamingo Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada in the late 1940s. It was the same David Berman who is well known amongst the much more famous men in organized crime, such as Benjamin Siegel and Lucky Luciano. With this in mind, you'd be correct in assuming that Susan had more than a few underworld connections at hand, or even probably had the skills and involvement herself. However, Berman was soon discovered slain in her house in Benedict Canyon, Los Angeles, California, on December 24, 2000, after her neighbors reported that her back door was open and her 3 fox terriers were loose. A few days later, Berman's address and the term cadaver appeared on a letter addressed to the Beverly Hills Police Department, stamped December 23rd. Beverly was misspelled as Beverly on the envelope. Durst was last seen in Northern California days before Berman was slain and flew from San Francisco to New York the night before Berman's body was discovered. She had just received $50,000 in 2 installments from Durst. Despite confirming to the Los Angeles Police Department that he had paid Berman $25,000 and faxing detectives a copy of her 1982 deposition on his missing wife, Durst refused to be questioned further about the murder. The last part describing Robert's extremely suspicious behavior is even more compounded by the fact that upon hearing from his sister that the McCormack's case was being looked at again by the police, he had simply disappeared from his home and disguised himself as an old woman to avoid interactions. Just what was going on? Well, we're sure that the next part of this story will only make that. Robert was arrested on October 9, 2001 in Galveston, when body pieces belonging to his elderly neighbor, Morris Black, were discovered floating in the Galveston Bay. He was released on a $250,000 bond, but failed to appear in court on October 16th, prompting a warrant for his arrest on a charge of bail jumping. He was apprehended at a Wegmans supermarket in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania on November 30th after attempting to shoplift Band-Aids, a newspaper, and a chicken salad sandwich, despite having $500 in his pocket. Police discovered $37,000 in cash, 2 firearms, marijuana, Black's driver's card, and instructions to Gilbert Najami's house in Connecticut in his rented car. If you remember well, you'd know that Gilbert Najami was that old friend of Kathleen McCormack's, who had seen her immediately prior to her disappearance and death at their last dinner night together. Clearly, Robert was not up to good with the instructions. He went so far as to stalk his brother Douglas outside his home in New York while armed. Yes, that's right. He was armed while stalking his brother. Fortunately, he was caught and deported to Texas to stand trial. Robert was prosecuted for the murder of Black in 2003. The prosecution charged Robert with premeditated first-degree murder and no lesser murder or manslaughter counts in his killing. He hired defense attorney Dick DeJurin and claimed self-defense. DeJurin prepared for the case by holding 2 mock trials. Dr. Milton Altschuler, a psychiatrist, was engaged by Durst's defense team to figure out why he was having trouble speaking with him, which got on DeJurin's nerves. His whole life's experience is so compatible with a diagnosis of Asperger's illness. Altschuler said after spending over 70 hours evaluating Durst and diagnosing him with Asperger's syndrome. According to Robert's defense team, Black, a grumpy and aggressive loner, allegedly snatched his .22 caliber target handgun from its hiding location and threatened him with it. The handgun fired during the battle for the pistol, hitting Black in the face. He admitted to dismembering Black's body with a paring knife, 2 saws, and an axe during cross-examination before bagging and discarding the remains in the Galveston Bay. Prosecutors were unable to offer enough forensic evidence to refute his version of the battle because Black's head was never discovered. On November 11, 2003, a jury acquitted him of murder due to a lack of forensic evidence. By now, you really shouldn't be surprised. We can be reliably sure that this story was a lie too. Durst pled guilty to 2 charges of bail jumping and 1 count of evidence tampering for dismembering Black's body on December 21, 2004. He received a 5-year sentence with credit for time served as part of a plea deal, forcing him to serve 3 years in jail.
How does someone walk free after admitting to dismembering a body? The acquittal in Morris Black's case is mind-boggling. Durst's wealth and cunning lawyers turned a gruesome act into a self-defense story. It's a gut punch to see justice fail like this. You can't help but feel for the victims' families, left with no closure. Have you ever seen a case where money seemed to outweigh truth? It's chilling to think Durst kept slipping away.
At this point, Robert Durst's story became rather well known. It was well known to the point where it led to multiple interviews that revealed his erratic and deceitful nature to the public. This snowballed into The Jinx, the life and the deaths of Robert Durst, a 6-part HBO documentary that revealed circumstantial evidence tying Durst to the death of Berman, who was suspected of knowing about McCormack's disappearance. Despite the advice of his attorneys and his wife, Deborah Lee Cheriton, Durst agreed to give the filmmakers several interviews and unlimited access to his personal archives. Durst was apprehended by the FBI in New Orleans on the same day that the last episode aired. The documentary ends with Durst moving into a bathroom where his microphone records him seemingly saying to himself,
"There it is. You're caught. What the hell did I do? Kill them all. Of course."
That right there, however incoherent, was the smoking gun. Durst was captured by FBI officials on March 14, 2015 at the Canal Street Marriott in New Orleans, where he had registered under the fictitious identity Everett Ward, only days after a Los Angeles court approved a first-degree murder warrant in connection with the Berman death. After driving 4 days to New Orleans from Houston, Durst was followed to the hotel after making 2 calls to check his voicemail. He was seen roaming aimlessly in the lobby and moaning to himself. On March 15, 2015, New York State Police investigator Joseph Basura, who has long been involved in the McCormack case and is said to have worked closely with the FBI and Los Angeles detectives, removed 60 file boxes of Durst's personal papers and effects from the Campbell Hall, home of Durst's friend Susan T. Giordano. Durst's then-wife, Deborah Lee Charlton, had delivered all of these artifacts to Giordano for safekeeping 3 years before. Videotaped depositions of Durst, his brother Douglas, and Charlton, all of which were relevant to the Black case, were also kept at Giordano's home. The trial of Robert Allen Durst that followed was long fought and extremely complex, with him fighting it tooth and nail. Highlights of the case include a conditional hearing that was held in February 2017, during which Nick Chavin, Robert's close friend and best man at his wedding, claimed that Robert had personally confessed to murdering Berman. The preliminary hearings featured significant testimony from a number of older witnesses who might not be accessible when the trial starts. Durst was arraigned on November 8, 2018 after Los Angeles County Superior Judge Mark Windham concluded that there was enough evidence to charge him for the murder of Berman. Durst pled not guilty to the charges the next day in court. His attorneys released court documents on December 24, 2019, contradicting his prior assertions and admitting that Durst penned the note in yet another surprise move. Durst has repeatedly denied writing the message, despite the fact that the handwriting looks to be identical to his own, as does the misspelling of the term Beverly in a preceding letter to Berman that Durst acknowledged to sending. Needless to say, nothing Robert Durst did was able to convince the judge of his innocence, and after dragging it on for another 2 years, on October 14, 2021, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for Berman's murder. His lawyer's motion for a new trial was granted by the court due to the overwhelming evidence supporting his guilt for the crime. And that was the end of Robert Allen Durst's disturbing story. However, there's more. It was reported in October 2021, shortly after Durst's first-degree conviction for the murder of Susan Berman, that the Westchester County, New York District Attorney's Office would impanel a grand jury to consider charges against Durst in the 1982 disappearance of his first wife, Kathleen McCormack Durst, although the District Attorney's Office never confirmed these claims. Durst is now on trial for a new allegation of murder in connection with the suspected death of his missing wife, Kathy McCormack, who had been missing for 39 years. And that's not all. Police were apparently investigating links between Durst and the disappearance of 18-year-old Lynn Scholes of Middlebury, Vermont, and 16-year-old Karen Mitchell of Eureka, California, only days after the Berman murder. Scholes, a Middlebury College freshman, was last seen near a bus stop across the street from Robert's health food store on December 10, 1971, the day she went missing. Credit card records placed him in Eureka on November 25, 1997, the day Mitchell vanished. Mitchell may have helped at a homeless shelter frequented by Robert, and he may have visited Mitchell's aunt's shoe business disguised in women's clothing. Mitchell was last seen heading to work from her aunt's business and maybe conversing with a person parked in an automobile. A witness sketch strongly resembled Robert.
That bathroom confession in the Jinx, it's unreal. Durst thought he was untouchable, but his own words betrayed him. Finally, a life sentence for Susan Berman's murder. But what about Kathleen? Her family's still waiting for closure after 39 years. This case shows how truth can take decades to surface, and it's a reminder to never stop seeking justice. What do you think Durst's story teaches us about trust and accountability?